After years of testing and development, after a few exploratory missions have gone to the Red Planet without a hitch, the moment has finally arrived. SpaceX and their Starship fleet is on their way to Mars. The excitement is nothing less than palpable. Elon Musk's dream of establishing a second home for the human species is about to come true. And as the months go by and the ships continue to close in on their objective, the excitement continues to build. But within days of their arrival, something begins to happen back on Earth. Some sort of development behind closed doors at NASA and the United Nations is being discussed, and things are suddenly looking very, very bad for SpaceX and their plans to colonize the Red Planet. And then, suddenly, with little warning, everything is brought to a halt. What caused this to happen? Well, it was the discovery of life. In 2024, when the first SpaceX vessel landed on Mars, life in great abundance was discovered. Now, one would think that this would be the kind of information that SpaceX would want to reveal to the world immediately, but the explorers who make the discovery choose to keep their data secret, and for an extremely good reason, because they know all too well how NASA and the authorities back on Earth are going to react. They know that the Cassini probe was sent into the Saturnian atmosphere to burn up for fear of possibly contaminating the icy moons of Saturn. As remote as that possibility was, they know how obsessed NASA is with not contaminating a new alien species. And since an entirely new species of life has definitely been discovered on Mars, the SpaceX explorers know that if this information gets out, their hopes and dreams of colonizing the Red Planet will be brought to an end. But unfortunately for them, the secret does eventually get out, and NASA and the United Nations insist that SpaceX cease and desist with its efforts to colonize the Red Planet. If they fail to do so, the governments of Earth will seize all of SpaceX's assets back on Earth. How likely is this? Well, we're going to find out right now. Good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Angry Astronaut. 17,000 subscribers. My mind is completely blown once again. Thank you very much. So, in any event, now that I've said that, let's get on to the topic at hand. As you may have noticed during the introduction, we're going to be talking a little bit about what does the discovery of life on Mars, and by the way, I am confident that that's what's going to happen. What's that going to mean for the future of colonization on this faraway world? A lot of people tend to think that because NASA has been so incredibly concerned about contamination, and we watched a little bit about how they dove the Cassini into Saturn's atmosphere in order to avoid this sort of thing, that NASA is going to forbid SpaceX from colonizing Mars, or that the UN is, or something along those lines, and that if we discover life on this planet, it's going to spell doom to Elon Musk's colonization ambitions. And I'm here to tell you that there is nothing further from the truth. Martian life is, if it exists, and I strongly believe that it does, is going to be incredibly resilient. It is going to be something that will be able to deal quite easily with our presence, and if anything, it's going to represent a greater danger to us than we represent to it. And I'm going to make that very clear in this particular episode. So sit tight and get ready to come face to face with life on Mars. Those of you who have been watching my channel for some time should know who this guy is. You may actually be getting a little sick of him, actually. His name is Dr. Gilbert Levin, and he was the man in charge of the Viking life experiments way back in 1976. And the results of his experiments, in my opinion, conclusively prove the existence of life on Mars and in great abundance. Both Viking 1 and 2 took a great number of soil samples from the Martian surface, and then nutrients were introduced into these samples to see if anything would consume them. The nutrients were slightly radioactive, so if any bacteria did consume them, it would produce a curious type of gas as a result. And lo and behold, this is precisely what happened at both Viking locations over the course of days and days. Same results every time you injected the nutrients. The more nutrients you pumped into the soil, the more that it was consumed at both Viking locations. Just to make sure that this wasn't some sort of natural chemical process, Dr. Levin had the samples heated to a degree that would kill any bacterial life, but not break down any chemical process. And lo and behold, the consumption of the nutrients stopped. And after that, he had the soil heated to a lesser degree to kill off some of the bacteria, but not all of it, and lo and behold, consumption of the nutrients dropped by about 40%. Everything about this experiment indicated that life was present at both Viking locations. But, as many of us know, the Viking instruments did not pick up the presence of organic molecules, which are necessary to life as we know it. But then again, those instruments were not very sensitive and could not pick up organic molecules even if there was 1 million of them in a given soil sample, whereas Dr. Levin's life-sensing equipment would pick up as few as 10 cells in any soil sample. And when the Curiosity rover showed up later on with far more sensitive equipment, it did pick up organic molecules. Since that time, Dr. Levin has offered to put new versions of his life detection equipment on future Martian rovers, and every time his offers have been rejected. As a matter of fact, NASA has told him flat out that if he makes any offers to place any future life detection equipment on a rover again, it will be rejected without any consideration whatsoever. Because, as they put it, any ambiguous results in regards to life on Mars would be bad for the agency. And that is a direct quote, at least if Dr. Levin is to be believed. This isn't science we're talking about here. This is politics. On top of that, a lot of other evidence has been detected since the time of Viking to suggest the presence of life on Mars. For example, there's an unusual amount of methane in the Martian atmosphere, and that methane tends to appear on a seasonal basis. Now, methane can appear because of an organic process, or the other possibility would be volcanism. However, volcanism tends to not be seasonal by nature. Another unusual thing about the Martian atmosphere is the presence of oxygen. Now, I'm going to get into what the oxygen means a little bit later on, but in addition to that, the majority of the Martian atmosphere is made up of CO2, and it has been pointed out that since Mars is constantly bombarded by cosmic rays, that CO2 should have been converted to carbon monoxide, with the extra oxygen atom having been stripped away. This should have happened millions of years ago, and yet there is CO2 in the Martian atmosphere, suggesting that there is something breathing and producing CO2 just as happens here on Earth. There is no other natural explanation for this. And by the way, the presence of CO2 in the Venusian atmosphere strongly indicates the presence of life there as well for the same reasons. But skipping over that, Dr. Levin's experiments have been tested time and again by naysayers trying to create a natural situation or a natural explanation for these experiments rather than a biological one in the laboratory again and again. And never have they been able to create a situation other than a biological one that explains the results that were achieved on Mars in 1976. And yet, the majority of exobiologists believe that his experiments did not reveal life back in 76. Is science done on a majority basis? Or should it be done as a result of experiments and data? Now, just to be clear, I don't think there's any sort of conspiracy going on here. It's just scientific bias and narrow-mindedness that's happening at the moment. However, what really pisses me off is that if SpaceX manages to achieve their objective and land humans on Mars in 2024 or 2026, the humans that set foot on the red planet will be doing so as guinea pigs, because we will not know for certain if there is life on the red planet until the soil samples from Perseverance returns by 2030 or 31. However, this is as much of a blessing as it is a curse, because by the time SpaceX conclusively proves that there is life on Mars, and by the way, I believe that they will, Mars will have already been contaminated by our presence. SpaceX departing at that point will make very little difference, and that's not the only factor to be considered. In addition, contaminating Martian bacteria with Earth-borne germs is going to be very difficult indeed. Martian bacteria will have to be resistant to extreme cold, near vacuum conditions, and quite a lot of radiation. But that's not the worst part of it. In addition, it will have to be able to survive perchlorates, which tend to be able to kill just about every type of Earth-borne bacteria with very few exceptions. However, there are a very few types of bacteria on Earth that are capable of not only surviving perchlorates in the Martian soil, but actually subsisting off of them, consuming perchlorates and producing oxygen as a byproduct. Remember when I talked about the unusual presence of oxygen in the Martian atmosphere? Might something be eating the perchlorates and producing oxygen as a result? Seems like a bit of a no-brainer to me. So any Earth bacteria that is going to represent any sort of threat to Martian bacteria will have to be able to survive cold, radiation, near vacuum, and perchlorates, and somehow represent some sort of threat to bacteria that can survive the same conditions. It doesn't seem very likely to me. As a matter of fact, bacteria this resilient could actually represent a much greater threat to us, and that's something that Dr. Levin strongly believes in, and also why he strongly opposes bringing samples back to Earth in the first place. This concern is shared by Cassie Conley, who is a former NASA planetary protection officer. She said, quote, "Since the beginning of space exploration, planetary protection has mandated that samples from Mars should be considered restricted Earth return. This requires the most stringent containment to protect both the samples and the Earth," unquote. However, in 2019, NASA's Protection Independent Review Board recommended lowering the category to what's called Category 2, which eliminates any requirement for oversight or containment of samples returned from Mars. Conley goes on to say, quote, We really don't understand Earth biology very well and certainly don't know much about Mars, so it's premature to conclude that there are no Martian biohazards. And yet, in spite of these dangers, sending samples back from Mars is precisely what the Perseverance intends to do, or rather, the people who designed the Perseverance. Now, usually for germs to be dangerous, they have to evolve side by side with their hosts. However, some experiments carried out by the universities of Aberdeen and Exeter are a bit disturbing to say the least. In those experiments, they introduced two amino acids, usually found in meteorites but seldom found on Earth, into the systems of mice, who have immune systems similar to humans, and discovered that the immune systems of the mice proved to be less efficient and less effective against these alien quote-unquote peptides. So what does all of this mean to SpaceX? Well, number one, since SpaceX is probably going to be arriving before 2035, which is roughly the time that the soil samples from Perseverance are going to be coming back to Earth, they will probably discover Mars life first. Number two, since they're going to be there anyway, they'll be in a much better position to study Martian life and determine whether or not it's a danger to human life rather than sending the samples back to Earth and risking a worldwide contagion. Number 3, possession is 9/10 of the law. Since SpaceX will be the first to discover Martian life, since they'll be the ones taking the risks in terms of studying it, determining what sort of advantages and breakthroughs can be gained from it, they'll be the ones who can dictate terms to the rest of the world as to what they decide to do with it, or rather, whether or not they remain on the planet to continue studying it, or if they leave. They'll be the ones making the decision, not some shadowy organization on Earth. And there's a final consideration, and that's cash. I mean, Elon Musk has a lot of money to influence political decisions anyway, but on top of that, any discovery of a brand new life form on another planet is going to be worth a tremendous amount of money. If you try to compel those who have discovered this life and have all of the data at their disposal to leave the planet if they don't want to, what's to prevent them from destroying their information, destroying their studies, or keep it to themselves, or sell it to somebody else who's less aggressive about forcing them off of Mars? No, I'm pretty certain that if SpaceX arrives on Mars first and discovers Martian life before NASA does, they're the ones that are going to be dictating the terms and not the other way around. Discovering life on Mars is going to be a huge boon for SpaceX's plans and not a negative. And so I strongly believe that when the first SpaceX explorers gaze out at the magnificent and alien landscape that will one day be their home, they can know with all certainty that they will not be contaminating anything or rendering anything extinct, but rather studying and learning how to live in harmony and in a symbiotic relationship with whatever alien life they find there. We will build artificial environments that are well suited to our kind of life, while the rest of the planet remains reserved for the life that has always lived there and is well adapted to its harshness, in the same way that humans and other native species on Earth share cities and national parks. There is no reason why we can't inhabit Mars in the same way and do it better. So, a lot of folks may disagree with the perspective that I have here, that they're going to feel that NASA if and when we discover life on Mars, and by the way, I strongly believe that there is life, as I think I've made very clear in this episode, that NASA or the UN or somebody else is going to make it impossible for us to colonize the planet. They're all going to get together in some sort of conspiracy and stop Elon Musk dead. And I want to make something completely clear here. The United States has completely disregarded the United Nations on many different occasions. On top of that, we have rendered thousands upon thousands of species on this planet extinct, all for the simple benefit, if you can call it that, of wealth and living space. And that's about it. Whereas Mars, we're talking about the exploration of a new world, the discovery and study of an entirely new type of life, and the preservation of our species. Far, far greater goals that we have in mind here with the colonization of this planet than what we've done on this planet and the amount of species that we have rendered extinct. If there's enough drive, and if there's enough desire, and if there's enough money, most of all, behind the whole project. And by the way, Elon has a strong relationship with the U.S. military now, and that also gives him a great deal of pull when it comes to decisions made by the U.S. government. I strongly believe that there is no way in hell, no matter what the UN has to say, that SpaceX is going to be stopped in its efforts to colonize Mars, regardless of what we find on that planet. And as I think I've also made very clear, it would be extremely hard for us to do anything to the life that does exist on that planet, should it exist at all. So, in any event, having said all of that, I'd like to update you real quick on the state of the channel. Because of the number of Patreon supporters that have jumped on board recently, thank you so much for your support. It has made a world of difference to me. I have been able to keep my head above water. The fickle nature of monetization has made it very, very difficult. And frankly, I can't depend on these same Patreon folks. And once again, sorry about the lighting here, guys. I don't know what continues to cause this, but I can't continue to rely on the Patreon folks who have been supporting me over and over, month after month, to continue doing so. It's not fair to them at all. And so therefore, I'm going to need new supporters if I'm going to be able to keep going, because monetization alone is not going to keep this channel running. But the good news is that you guys have given me enough support to keep this channel going at the moment and to keep my head above water, as I have said, and to give us a good chance for success in the future. So in any event, in the description, there are many ways to support me besides Patreon. There's merch, there's PayPal, there's all kinds of different ways. And I encourage you to take a close look if you want to continue to see content like what you've been seeing on this channel for all of these months. And oh, one other thing. Thank you so much for 17,000 subscribers. My mind is completely blown. So, until we discover life on Mars and we are confronted with the decision of whether or not we are going to take on this problem, whatever the problem that Martian life may represent, head on, and we are going to confront it rather than run away from it, I am confident. I urge all of you to stay angry about space.